Should the U.S. help Ukraine now or when it's too late? A photo essay by James Ford. This is a rhetorical analysis on an op-ed called "The U.S. Must Arm Ukraine Before It's Too Late," written about the ongoing war in Ukraine and how the U.S. should go on about handling it. Ukraine is an independent nation who is discussing joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, and Russia disliked that enough to start a war with them, and vowed to take control of Ukraine to maintain Ukraine's neutral status. Ukraine was invaded by Russia on February 24, 2022, and many, including current Russian President Vladimir Putin, speculated that they would be overrun and under Russian rule within weeks. Ukraine, however, has proven themselves to be a much harder nation to conquer than they were given credit for, and the war has been locked in a stalemate for months. Russia has been threatening any outside countries that are considering involvement and throwing nuclear threats around like candy, and many American and foreign diplomats are trying to figure out how to support Ukraine without setting off Putin's itching nuclear trigger finger. This article was written by 3 diplomats who promised to do just that, and is supported by over a dozen other diplomats and military leaders who feel that it is our best possible method of supporting Ukraine without causing World War III. We will be discussing the background of our authors, motivations for involvement, and possible consequences of inaction in this photo essay. Starting off with our authors, pictured on the top left is Deborah Kagan, an American politician and former advisor to President George W. Bush. She is also a public advocate for increased westernization in ex-Soviet states, and Ukraine is, as of present time, an ex-Soviet state that is moving towards a more Western policy and governing style, and is making attempts to join NATO. Pictured to the right of her is John Herbst, who has had a similar career and influence. He was an American ambassador in Ukraine from 2003 to 2006 and has had quite a bit of influence in Ukraine, taking part in President Bush's policy to dissuade Ukraine from joining Russia and several ex-Soviet states in what is now called the Eurasian Economic Union. The final author, pictured below Deborah Kagan, is Alexander Vershbow, a former American ambassador to Russia who is known for rejecting the ceremony in which he was supposed to publicly give Vladimir Putin his official letter of credence in person when he became ambassador. Instead, he left Putin hanging right before the ceremony occurred for a quote-unquote planned vacation. All 3 authors have spent a majority of their professional careers fighting against the current Russian regime, and this war is an opportunity to bring an end to the political rival that they are also publicly outspoken against. This does hint at some underlying biases, but that doesn't make their argument less credible in a significant way. They obviously aren't fans of Putin's regime and haven't been for a long time, yet their proposed solution is not clouded by disdain for the Russian ruler. It is actually a lot more conservative than the request for American boots on the ground that some are discussing. And with Putin's recent threats of nuclear war and Russia's killings of Ukrainian civilians, this war is recognizably an ongoing human tragedy that needs to be ended as soon as possible. Putin wants to recover what is left of what he believes to be Russia's empire, and the Ukraine war is seen as the start of the Russian campaign to reclaim the land that they lost during the collapse of the Soviet Union. Many fear that if they gain control of Ukraine, they would be unlikely to stop there. If Putin succeeds at his goal of recreating the Soviet Union, many free countries would be subjected to his unstable rule. Although this war may be personal to the writers, they value supporting Ukraine as much as possible without giving Putin enough grounds to escalate this war further. Many fear that if they gain control of Ukraine, they would be unlikely to stop there. If Putin succeeds at his goal of recreating the Soviet Union, many free countries would be subjected to his unstable rule. Although this war may be personal to the writers, they value supporting Ukraine as much as possible without giving Putin enough grounds to escalate this war further. To move past the stalemate, in their plan they propose supplying Ukraine with weapons called HIMARS, pictured on the left, which are long-range mobile weapons capable of striking Russian-occupied lands anywhere in Ukraine, along with the munitions they fire and parts to maintain them in abundance. They also request to supply air defense systems like the Patriot system, pictured on the right, which is capable of preventing the Russians from using a good majority of their missiles, along with various other supplies. Russian missiles have been terrorizing Ukrainian civilians and soldiers alike, and Ukraine currently does not have the defenses to stop them. With these defenses and a weapon that grants them the ability to fight back more than they have been able to, they believe that this will be enough for Ukraine to move past the stalemate and fend off Russia completely. This isn't a drastic shift in what we're already giving them, just an increase in the things that they actually need, which will hopefully tip the scales of a war Ukraine has already proven that they're a strong contender to win. If America escalates by sending troops, we would be putting not only American soldiers, but the people of Ukraine at risk. This would only result in more lives at risk and more lives lost, especially if Russia follows through with their threats of nuclear escalation. We have already been offering weapons and financial aid to Ukraine, and it is shown in Putin's lack of response to this that providing aid in the form of supplies will not provoke Russia enough to escalate to nuclear war. This war has already caused mass suffering, including 15,000 civilian casualties and over 100,000 troops killed on both sides. Russia has begun not only targeting Ukrainian troops, they've begun attacking civilians and non-military infrastructure. Many have been forced out of their homes or killed, and those who chose to stay in their homes have had to deal with constant Russian missile and artillery bombardment. This has become everyday life in Ukraine, and that is not a reality that anyone should have to be subjected to. The American military overpowers Russia, especially in the state that they're in right now, but joining a war that is for the most part one country versus another opens opportunities for both sides to bring in allies and outsider countries to pick sides. If we begin introducing third parties, allies on both sides could join the fight, and this may possibly result in a third world war, something that with modern weapons would be extremely devastating to the entire world. To avoid this, the authors request that we instead empower Ukraine to hold the Russians off themselves with the support of our weapons. Russia is hurting right now, and their morale is extremely low. They are underfunded and have been pictured using substandard weapons and armor, and have struggled to keep any of their gains in Ukraine. President Zelensky of Ukraine has been shown to be an inspiration to his people and has refused to give up, embodying the spirit of his citizens. Ukrainians have the advantage of knowing what they're fighting for, their home, and this advantage has inspired them to fight off and hold off a much bigger enemy, even though the world thought that they would lose in mere days. They are fighting for their home, and Russia will need to back off soon if we can keep supplying them with the tools they need to win. If we put our troops in Ukraine, this war will affect me directly. As a member of the U.S. Army, I feel that putting American troops in Ukraine is something that I view as both unnecessary and dangerous not only to our soldiers but to the world. Although it is unlikely for Putin to use his nukes if we get involved, that isn't a guarantee that it won't happen, and that is a threat that I don't think needs to be taken lightly. Although Russia's military is struggling, they have plenty of nukes to throw around if they have the desire to, and if we send in our people, they have what they feel is enough reason to target the country that our military exists to defend. If we send our people in, we would likely defeat the Russian military in a one-on-one scenario, especially in the state that they're in. But if we do that, we open the floor for Russia and whatever allies they have to start sending soldiers and missiles towards our home, and that isn't an outcome that anyone in our country should desire. We need to help Ukraine, but we need to do it in a way that still protects ourselves. I agree with the authors. I do not feel that it is necessary to send our people in right now, and I believe that a grand majority of our military agrees with this. If there are other strategies to help Ukraine stop Russia without getting our own people killed, we should try to employ them first. This war is not only personal to me, but if it gets out of hand, it will become personal to a grand majority of the United States and to the world. And I agree with the authors that this should be prevented at all costs.